Once Germany was defeated and occupied in 1945, one thing united the Allied powers: a desire to eradicate Nazism from both the hearts of the German people and the physical landscape of the shattered nation.
Our military government, that is, your husbands and sons, have to prod the Germans into putting their house in order. Why? We have an interest in Germany that is purely selfish. We cannot live next to a disease-ridden neighbor. And we must prevent not only starvation and epidemics, but also diseases of the mind, new brands of fascism from springing up. What is more, we have to persuade the Germans to do this themselves.
The former exercise, known as denazification, was reasonably successful, allowing both for the identification and punishment of war criminals and the rehabilitation of ordinary Nazi Party members and Hitler's fellow travelers.
This time, the Wehrmacht are really beaten. To the wire cages all over Germany, the master race of men are slubbering along. But this mass of humanity has to be sorted out into something like order. Not only their bodies, but also their minds. What about the ideas in their heads? They have to be demobilized and got back to work. But let one man or woman who still believes in the Nazi regime or the destiny of the German people to rule the world take office, and you have the beginnings of another war. So they are put through a screen. To begin with, selected Germans interrogate them and fill in their demobilization papers. Note this meek little man who looks like a clerk or a grocer. Here is his portrait in Luftwaffe uniform. Then all their thumbprints are taken for record, and they are stripped and examined for the SS mark tattooed under the left armpit. Then their past history and character is examined by our intelligence officers, German-speaking ex-commandos and parachutists. The majority of Germans get through this close examination and are demobilized. But every so often there appears one who is suspect or who is wanted, whose papers are too good or whose answers are not good enough.
The latter exercise, which is the subject of this video, was almost entirely successful and resulted in both West and East Germany being ruthlessly scoured of National Socialist imagery and symbolism, statuary and architecture, to the point today that little tangible physical imagery of Nazism remains in the new Germany. The process of physically eradicating Nazism began in 1945 with German prisoners of war. Earlier in the war, German POWs had either kept their original uniforms, complete with insignia and decorations, or exchanged them for simple POW dress created out of the uniforms of their captors. But with the mass surrenders of 1945, the Western Allies ordered German soldiers to remove anything from their uniforms that carried the swastika. Eagles were removed from caps and unpicked from tunics, and any decorations that carried the swastika were unpinned from tunics. This was actually in violation of the Geneva Convention concerning the treatment of POWs. The Allies then went one further during a series of war crimes trials. Senior German field marshals, generals, admirals, and other officers were ordered to have their uniforms completely stripped of all insignia, including their rank badges and World War I decorations. This was again in violation of the treatment of POWs, which was supposed to be accorded the dignity befitting their military ranks. At the Nuremberg trial, Reichsmarshal Göring, Field Marshal Keitel, and Colonel General Judel all appeared in uniforms devoid of insignia. Why? Perhaps it was done to make them appear less formidable in the courtroom, to strip them physically and metaphorically of their status and their previous swaggering arrogance. But it was an effective move in eradicating the swastikas that adorned the uniforms, decorations, and imagery of all branches of the German armed forces in World War II. Naturally, the German national flag and the Wehrmacht's battle flag were outlawed, as they both contained Nazi symbols. In the occupied cities, towns, and villages, the inhabitants were ordered to turn in all weapons and Nazi-era uniforms to be destroyed.
Civilians, conscious that they are thoroughly beaten, obey readily. Uniforms are turned in. Post-war Germany will have no armies. Arms are surrendered, pistols, swords, daggers, sabers. They will be destroyed.
Former Hitler youths were given the task of collecting and burning all Nazi portraits of Hitler and the other leaders, Nazi flags, books, pamphlets, and bunting. The Allies now had to denazify thousands of buildings. Teams of German POWs and civilian artisans were ordered to deface all swastikas carved on buildings, often found in the claws of eagles. In Germany today, Nazi eagles still exist, but with their swastikas crudely excised. This extended to any and all monuments that incorporated swastikas. The buildings were then turned over to new users, many surviving to the present day. Metal eagles and swastikas were cut down from buildings using torches and scrapped, or in the case of the enormous bronze swastika atop the Zeppelinfeld in Nuremberg, blown up for a propaganda show. Some buildings, due to their close association with Hitler or the regime, were leveled. The Soviets demolished the wrecked Reich Chancellery and blew up Hitler's bunker in Berlin, while the Americans demolished the honor temples in Munich, where the Bierhul-Putsch Nazi martyrs' tombs had been placed. The shell of Hitler's private home in Bavaria, the Berghof, was likewise blown up. During the Nazi era, many street names had been changed, renamed after Hitler or other Nazis. The street signs were all taken down and scrapped, the locations reverting to their former names or new ones associated with the regimes in West or East Germany. Over a period of a few years, Germany was physically cleansed of Nazism. Interestingly, though the physical eradication of Nazi symbolism in Germany was very successful, eradicating Nazi ideas from German people was less so. Though a very thorough denazification process ensured that Germans were punished or at least censured in some way for their membership of the NSDAP or organizations like the SS, many Germans only paid lip service to what was to them an occupation policy by their former enemies. Polls conducted by the Americans, for example, always nervous that Nazism would survive the end of the Third Reich, recorded that Hitler was still held in high regard in the few years after the defeat. A poll conducted in 1955 recorded that 48% of respondents felt that Hitler would have become one of Germany's greatest leaders, quote, but for the war, end quote. One of the reasons why Nazi ideals and sympathy for National Socialism lingered long after 1945 was due to practical reasons. The occupying Allies had to use former Nazis to keep Germany going. So they had to turn a blind eye to some people's questionable backgrounds. For example, in 1945, the bomb and battle-ravaged city of Cologne needed fresh drinking water. The Americans discovered that 18 out of 21 engineers employed in the city's waterworks were ex-Nazis. The choice was simple: either remove 18 skilled men from their posts for political reasons, or provide clean water for hundreds of thousands of people. The Americans realized that if they fired the 18 men, they may as well have shut off the city's water supply as well, so the ex-Nazis stayed in their posts. This situation was common throughout West Germany. In 1948, 94% of judges and prosecutors in Bavaria were ex-Nazis. In the new federal capital, Bonn, 1/3 of Foreign Office staff were ex-Nazis, and similar figures existed for police forces across Germany. This meant that many people in positions of power and influence in West Germany remained sympathetic to Nazism in the first couple of decades after the war, or at least were nostalgic, perhaps helping to explain why West German diplomats were so slow and disinterested in taking action to help track down wanted Nazi war criminals. It would take until the 1960s and 70s for attitudes to change as the old Nazis retired and a new generation of Germans unconnected with the crimes of the National Socialist period came to power and influence. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.